Welcome back. The Obama administration considering changes to the way that it handles hostages held by terrorists. Right now, the U.S. does not negotiate with terrorists, and it also will not pay ransom. And it also does not want families, for that matter, going in their own pockets to pay ransoms either. But after hostages like James Foley and Warren Weinstein died, and many families complained about the U.S. policy, it looks like things could very well change. The administration considering letting family members negotiate directly and even pay off the kidnappers. In fact, Weinstein's family reportedly paid some money to his captors in 2012. Unfortunately, they never released him, and a U.S. drone accidentally killed him, as we know, in January. Joining the panel now, Mike Lyons, a military analyst, retired captain in the U.S. Army who served in Iraq. And Mike, I get it from the family's perspective. Certainly even some of our allies, let alone other nations in this world, they also don't have as restrictive a policy as we do. What do you think? Should the policy be absolute, or should we tweak it?
Well, I think now's the time to have the discussion. It's worth the discussion, and it's worth to put out maybe different guidelines for it, because this whole thing really snuck up on this administration. No one expected ISIS to start putting people on television and then beheading them, I think, in a lot of ways. And while the policy goes back to like the Reagan era of, we don't negotiate with terrorists in that regard, I think it's worth to have a discussion about it, to do anything we can in order to possibly release some of these civilians.
So let me do the devil's advocate. If all of a sudden ISIS sees that we're willing to pay, or let the family pay, or the company of the person, let's say, that's been captured pay, doesn't that incentivize them to just take more hostages?
Well, it does and it doesn't. I think, first of all, if you're paying money, whether it's electronic or even hard currency, you can follow the money. It's traceable in some regards, and so you can. It could actually be a way to get more information with regard to who you're dealing with. Now again, the government's not going to come out and say we're now going to support this policy completely. I think it'll be more of the, well, we're no longer going to pursue a family and prosecute them should they decide to go down this path, because that has risks on itself. You saw that one hostage's family lost about $250,000, and so and that is the issue. And this whole incident is brought up just procedures of how we're going to deal with these kinds of families, I think.
What do you guys think?
We always negotiated with terrorists, even when we had a policy that said we wouldn't. A lot of this is the difference between posturing and what you actually do. And the posturing is interfering with us, and I think what the president's trying to do is align us more closely between what we actually do and what the policy is. And there's no good answer to this. There's no right way to do it.
I think the government stays where it is in the position, but like there's K&R insurance out there, kidnap and ransom insurance, and if people, executives go to countries that are particularly dangerous, they get a K&R policy. This stuff happens
But
already.
don't you bring up a point, though, where if an executive from fill in the blank, gets captured versus Joe Smith, who's a humanitarian from Fayetteville, Arkansas, his family, has got $10 to their name, that the guys who's got K&R insurance from, fill in the blank international firm, all of a sudden there's wherewithal for him, but there's not wherewithal for this humanitarian who went over to try and feed some kids, in Syria.
Maybe they'll kidnap less humanitarians.
In the 80s, Ross Perot's company did that. There was a mission that company themselves got involved with. I think the government doesn't want that to happen. But you're right, it becomes a haves-not situation. But to that point, we can't have the accountability of people going over there and thinking they're helping out, like that woman, Kayla Mueller's terrific of a person she was so far over her head to get into that spot. And again, you can't help everybody all the time. So I think that's what we have to be careful of.
Yeah. Is there any indication that you know of that these groups know who they're kidnapping before they do the kidnapping?
No, in most cases they're just targets of opportunity.
So then the argument about the differentiation between if you go for a high value kidnap versus a low level kidnap, if you got the funds behind you, sort of out the window, because the people who are doing the kidnapping don't know that this one's worth a lot of money and that one's not.
No, and in fact, the Europeans are actually more valuable because they know that those governments will negotiate. The French, for example, who do you want showing up at these negotiations? Do you want special forces, or do you want a French government official wearing, penny loafers, with a briefcase?
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important for the U.S. government to stay firm on it.
Yeah, and again, it gets back to staying out of the family's way in terms of not prosecuting that. And you saw Secretary Kerry said, when the Foley family came out in particular, they were very hard on the government. But it gets back, it's probably one person. It wasn't necessarily the Secretary of State, it wasn't that office. It might have been somebody in the FBI that wanted to toe the line.
There is a risk too, though. I know we're going to go break, but if all of a sudden you greenlight the families, and some family wants to go on every single morning show and every other TV show, and basically, genuflect, begging ISIS not to do something, now all of a sudden you're in this impossible situation. They go on TV begging the president, please do what you have to do to get my kid back. I mean, I can just see where this thing could spin out, right?
Yeah, and there's got to be this, the separate lane for the soldier. Again, I think we've had it talked about the show, Bergdahl as a soldier. That's a separate lane. That's a swap. You've got to compartmentalize that away. But to your point, you can't have people begging the president on television like that.
Easy for me to say from a cushy studio, I grant you. Okay, now we want you to get involved in our conversation and head over to Facebook and Twitter and answer our question today. Should the U.S. change its policy about negotiating with terrorists? Now, when we come back, an anniversary. Today marking the 40th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. The last helicopter evacuated people from the U.S. Embassy, and we were out. We look back at the parallels between then and now, and I'll also ask Mike here, as a West Point graduate, what were the lessons taught about Vietnam, and did we learn them as we talk about Iraq and Afghanistan today?